Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Hey folks. Now, long-time watchers of my channel will know that I covered Star Trek Discovery, and that I'm a bit of a fan of the old Star Trek shows. I'm a big fan of sci-fi in general, but not so much the new stuff. But anyway, during the period between Season 1 and Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, they churned out a bunch of shorts, and I briefly mentioned them back at the end of my review of Season 2, partly because I didn't really have the time or energy to cover them by themselves, also because they weren't available actually early on because of silly reasons in the UK, and also because they weren't that important to the plot, not so much that I couldn't basically just cover them during the appropriate episodes. But it recently came to my attention that there's a whole fresh new bunch of them for Season 2, and the very last of them is actually going to be a prelude to the new Picard show. Now, since I plan to review the show Picard, as well as the next season of Discovery when it comes on, it made sense that I do a wee video reviewing these short treks because, they're just wee and short, so maybe it'll be fun. So I'm going to break it up a wee bit. To start with, the first 3 episodes are all based on the Enterprise from the Discovery show, with some familiar faces turning up and some new people as well. And the first one was called Q&A. And this is one where we get to see Spock's very first day on the Enterprise, and we get to see a massive close-up of him looking like he's just pooed himself and doesn't care. Anyway, number 1 says that she expects him to answer questions, so he does, hence the title. And then they get locked in together in a broken turbo lift, and they end up exhausting all the questions that he's got. So he asks her one, and they end up singing.
I am the very model of a modern major general of information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know that...
Yeah, that happens. And the next thing up was the trouble with Edward, and that's all about how a newly promoted Enterprise officer becomes a captain. And yeah, that's her off of Alita Battle Angel and Birdsong. Hello. Anyway, she gets like a difficult crew member, and turns out he wants to genetically experiment on tribbles to make food. And she says, no, don't do that, and he goes ahead and does that anyway, and it goes kind of badly all round for pretty much everybody because, well...
He was an idiot.
And the third episode, Ask Not, is set on a starbase, and there's a baddie attack happening, and a young Enterprise trainee engineer is told that she's got to guard a mutineer, and the mutineer turns out to be Captain Pike. And he makes a big case for her to let him go and tries convincing her using pretty much every trick in the book, and but it just isn't happening. She still says absolute no. And then he's like, well, good stuff, take off my handcuffs because it was all a trick and you just got a job on the Enterprise, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. After that, there was 2 reanimated episodes, the first of which is called Ephraim and Dot, and it's all about the tardigrade from Discovery, or at least a tardigrade, who's looking for a nice wee place to lay her eggs and then get on with her life. Only she gets bumped into by the Enterprise and ends up having to contend with a funny wee robot that's trying to get her all went out the ship. And all the while she's passing through classic moments in Star Trek because wibbly wobbly timey-wimey. And then the next episode was called The Girl Who Made the Stars, and that was a bit more grounded, and it was a CGI one about everybody's favourite character, Michael Burnham. Only it's not really, because this is back when she was a wee girl living it with her mum and her dad, and her dad's telling her a bedtime story because she can't sleep, and he tells her the story of the girl who made the stars. Yeah. Now, just to deviate from the norm a wee bit, I'm going to talk about all these ones before we actually get onto the Picard episode, and I'll explain about that later. So, overall, I've got to say, I'm not really in love with any of these. I mean, the best one was probably Ephraim and Dot, and that's about it. And the good thing is, though, is I didn't absolutely hate any of them either, and that might come as a bit of a surprise. Now, I know that this channel's called Grumpy Opinions, and I spend a lot of time on the interweb just like everybody else, and I know that as well as when I've been doing my reviews of Discovery, there have been a whole host of other channels out there who do a lot of reviewing of Star Trek and other shows, and they were reviewing it. And I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody, but a lot of these guys, and most of them are guys, not all, they approached the show completely from the point of view that anything that wasn't exactly in line with the old shows was some kind of hideous insult to them and the families of anybody who ever watched or worked on Star Trek. Now, I mean, I get it, there are terrible things in Discovery.
I like science.
And the short treks from Season 1, there was some really, really bad stuff, but I can only call it how I see it, and I don't like to meet a show not on an even keel. Like, I want it to be up there and I just see how it goes, and if I like it, I like it, if I don't like it, I don't like it. And I kind of enjoyed some of this. I mean, Q&A, I mean, let's face it, it was kind of fun. Like, the two people playing, like Spock and Una, like, they were both clearly enjoying these parts, and they have a good time, and they actually come across quite solidly like the characters who were in the original pilot. And the one thing that they threw in this whole ending gambit, I mean, yeah, I get that people didn't like that, because, I mean, Una, I mean, yeah, her name is Una, Like she has one name, like Sting or Bono or something. Anyway, Una shows off that she loves to sing and fires into this Gilbert and Sullivan, and yeah, it's about as cringy as you'd expect. And to be honest, I like Rebecca Romijn, but I don't think she's the greatest singer in the world. I mean, certainly not in this. Maybe it's just this recording, this direction. But yeah, and then when Spock comes in at the end, it's kind of a bit goofy and silly, and she swears him to secrecy, and I'm like, what am I watching here? This is people don't act like this in real life. And I get why folk didn't like it. Like, fans of classic Trek want Spock to be Spock, and they want him to be like, oh, it's a logical captain. And giving him a goofy grin and singing moments aren't great. But the thing is, and the way I kind of justify this to myself is, Vulcans suppress their emotions, and Spock's only half Vulcan. And the thing is, in the shows and the films, yeah, they did it one way, but they never really went that far into showing him actually having to or choosing to suppress his emotions. So they've been doing that now, and I think that kind of works because that is part of the story universe, and it certainly is the way that they've taken him in Discovery, and that's what this is a short trek from. I wasn't expecting it to suddenly go the other way. I suppose the other thing that's getting folks go is that Una steps in and she ends up being the one telling Spock to suppress them even more, even though he says he's already been doing that. And then at the end, we get to see him doing his best original series Spock impression at the end. And
They do, Captain, but they tend to keep it to themselves.
yeah, I mean, it's naff, but I didn't hate it. I just didn't. It wasn't terrible. Whereas the trouble with Edward, I mean, because it's a joke, yeah, like the trouble with tribbles. I mean, you get it, and he makes tribbles, and they're made of his DNA, so it's the trouble with it. Anyway, that was the joke. Anyway, and that's how bad the jokes in this actually are. This episode is really bad, partly because it's written as a kind of screwball comedy with really stupid moments, and at the same time, also really poorly chosen camera angles. I mean, how do you make her look bad? But they've managed it. Honestly, I mean, she's a bonny lassie. How do you make her look that bad? And now this really annoyed people, and I kind of agree because there's been this whole thing about how they've portrayed socially awkward savant genius people on Star Trek before. I mean, Lieutenant Barclay, and a load of videos online covered this, like much better than I'm doing here, about how it doesn't actually make sense and how they're treating him differently in this. And you could argue, I suppose, that this is set 40 years earlier, so maybe things have changed, but really it's just a badly written episode played for bad laughs. And the problem is most of the laughs, as I said, don't really land. And we're supposed to like this captain, and she's meant to be the hero, but she comes across as like inept, out of control of the ship, and at one point a bit unpleasant.
This conversation's over.
You're dismissed.
Right, but
This is the end of the conversation.
Captain, if I could.
You can't.
Right, but I had this as
The conversation's over.
I mean, yeah, she's got reasons, and Edward absolutely is a total arse. But still, I mean, it just didn't work. And Ask Not, which is the third one of those three, gives this kind of fake out mutiny thing. And it's actually quite a nice wee episode. It kind of reminded me of that Next Generation episode when Deanna Troi had to order like hologram Geordie to his death, to get a promotion. Only in this kind of a lo-fi way because they didn't have holodecks and stuff. So they've set it up as like this little scenario that she doesn't even know is going to happen. And it was really good seeing Anson Mount play Pike. He's awesome. He was the best thing about last season of Discovery. But I hate to say it, the whole, is he a mutiny? I mean, that didn't really make much sense because even if you just watched Q&A, which I did watch it like 5 minutes before I watched this, it's basically stated in that he would never argue the things he's arguing in this. So you know straight off the bat that it can't be real. So that's one decent out of three, one okay, and one a bit rubbish. So, I mean, that's pretty much, you balance it out and that's all kind of in the middle. Yeah, that's how maths works, I think. Anyway, animated ones though, they were actually really good. The tardigrade one was just pure fun, clearly inspired a bit by Wall-E as well as like old cartoons. And I like the fact that they used little bits from classic Trek because they actually used like audio of William Shatner and the rest doing bits from episodes. And you got to see them doing that, and then you got to see them suddenly end up in the Wrath of Khan, and then you saw them actually like crashing the ship in the third one. And I thought that made sense, like because tardigrades are time traveling, multi-dimensional creatures, so maybe flying through it was traveling through time, just traveling always back to the same spaceship. And the other one, I mean, that was a bit more real looking. And it was kind of nice. It was kind of cut rate Pixar, even down to Michael cuddling like a cuddly tardigrade, and it was fun. And it was a nice wee story. It was a bit flimsy, but it was kind of cool. It's an updating of an old African like fairy tale. And I like the fact that they reframed this idea that people in the future, if they're telling their kids stories about ancient stuff, aliens and spaceships aren't a weird thing. They're an everyday thing. So instead, the fairy tales thing, it's not like a weird god or a strange being. It's literally just an alien with a broken spaceship. And he doesn't say that outright, but that's basically what he alludes to. And she can accept that because that's her reality. And I kind of like that idea. And the ending made me feel a bit weird because we all know how this turns out from the Burnhams, and the only time we've ever seen this little house before was in flashbacks of Michael's parents getting murdered. So yeah, that felt a little bit grim. So it all kind of turns out a bit bad. And that just leaves me with the Picard-based bit. Now, the Picard one was called The Children of Mars. And I left this to last because, frankly, there's not an awful lot to say about it. It's all set mostly to this cover of David Bowie's We Could Be Heroes, and it's got two schoolgirls who don't get on. This is obviously in the future. And they both speak to their parents at the beginning, whose parents both work in different jobs on Mars. And one has a good relationship with their mum, and the other one has a bad relationship with their dad. And, because of this, they end up, there's a bit of antagonism, some accident, some not, and it ends up with them getting into a brawl. And then they end up in detention. And while they're sitting there in detention, aliens attack Mars. And, of course, the base that the parents work on gets blown up, and the two girls, grab each other's hands and, shock. And it's kind of interesting. And it doesn't really tell us much, and we have no ideas if these kids are even in the show or if they're going to be just in this wee short trek. Probably just in the short trek. But it was nice, and I liked the fact that at the end there was just a little flash on a monitor of, Admiral Picard says this attack is devastating. And it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. I mean, they used a still image of him. They didn't even use any footage, so whatever. It's a bit cheap, but there we go. But I liked it. And the style of the show and the cinematography, it looked different from Discovery, but also different enough from the classic Star Trek shows. And although this is just a taster, a wee sort of by the way, Mars is going to get its ass handed to it, and then that's going to be the beginning of the show kind of message, so that everyone's on the same page. I mean, I presume that they'll actually reiterate that when the first episode of Picard begins. But yeah, I mean, if this is the tone they're going for, it could be quite decent. It seems a bit more serious, but there's not really much I can add because there's not much to this. There's very little dialogue, and as I said, Picard is actually out, so there's not an awful lot for me to say other than mostly New Trek hasn't lived up to being great. It's been okay for the best part, and this was probably one of the best ones. I mean, yeah, as I said, I really liked Ephraim and Dot, but this one was okay. On the whole, it's not great, but it's not terrible, as they say. So until Picard comes out for proper, I've been Ian, and these have been some grumpy opinions.